Somewhere in a drawer in your house, or your dad's, there's a scratched-up old carry piece worth more than the car sitting in your driveway. And if you're like most people, you'd hand it to somebody for 20 bucks at a yard sale and feel good about clearing out the clutter. I've watched exactly that happen. A guy at an estate sale passes a dealer a beat-up old pocket knife for pocket change, and before the sale even closes, that dealer has flipped it to someone who knew what it was for 4 figures. The fortune isn't locked in a safe. It's in the junk drawer, mixed in with the dead batteries and the spare keys. And the scratches, the worn edges, the honest patina you'd instinctively want to buff out before you sold it? Hang on to that thought, because on most of this list, that wear is doing something you would never guess, and cleaning it off is one of the fastest ways to throw money away. So before anything you own ever leaves the house, you should know what you're actually holding. These are 8 vintage everyday carry pieces that quietly turned into serious money, counting up to the one people give away the most without ever realizing what it was. And number 1 might be sitting in a sock drawer right now, scratched to nothing, worth 5 figures. The one most likely to already be in your junk drawer is also the tool every other tool on this planet is a copy of. Number 8, the original Leatherman, not a new one, the first generation pocket survival tool, the thing Tim Leatherman built the entire company on back in 1983. This is the knife and pliers gadget that invented the whole multi-tool category, and because Leatherman has stamped out millions of them since, nobody gives an old one a second look. I've got one that lived in a truck door pocket for the better part of a decade, and I nearly threw it in a donation box during a move without thinking twice. Turns out the earliest ones are the collectible tier. A true first-generation PST, the pre-1992 run, brings around $200, sometimes more with its original leather sheath, while a mid-90s example is a $70 user. That's not a fortune on its own, but it's the appetizer, and it's the one you're statistically most likely to actually own. And the first generation specifically is the one people want, for a reason that's worth understanding. This is the tool that made a whole toolbox in your kitchen drawer look silly. Every plier-based multi-tool that came after it, from the cheap copies to the ones costing 200 bucks today, is chasing what this one did first. Collectors want the very first run because it's where the whole idea started. The steel is nothing special. Spotting the good one is easy. Open it up and look inside the handle. The very earliest ones have no date code stamped in there at all, and the tang reads Pocket Survival Tool with the old patent number. The moment Leatherman started stamping a date code inside, you're into the common era. So no date code, original sheath, honest wear. That's the one you set aside instead of dropping in a parts bin. Your dad had the next one. Everybody's dad did. Number 7, the Buck 110 Folding Hunter. Every father, uncle, and grandfather in America had one of these riding in a belt sheath, and Buck has been building them continuously since 1964, which is exactly why people assume the worn old one in the drawer is worth the same 40 bucks as the shiny new one on the shelf. Most of the time they're right, but not always, and the difference is a detail the size of a fingernail. The money is in the early tang stamps. Buck ran a 2-line stamp in the late 60s and very early 70s, and for a short window, roughly 1968 through 1970, they put that stamp on the right-hand side of the blade instead of the left. That one detail can turn a common folder into a $150 to $300 knife for the right collector, and more if it's clean with its original 2-piece box. There's a rarer version still, with a little asterisk in the stamp that hunters chase even harder. I know a guy who works knife show tables doing basically nothing but digging early 110 stamps out of junk bins, and he is very happy for you to keep believing they're all the same knife. This is also where people overreach though. A worn 110 from the 80s or 90s is genuinely just a $40 knife, and no amount of wanting it to be special changes that. The premium lives in that narrow early window and nowhere else. So on a buck, that stamp is the entire ball game. How many lines it has, and which side of the blade it sits on. Read that before you write it off as an old belt knife, and read it before you talk yourself into a jackpot, because usually there isn't one. Number 6 can hit $17,000 at the top end, though most sell for a tiny fraction of that. And it started life as the thing your grandfather thought of as a cheap gadget, Wenger. For about a century, there were 2 companies making the real Swiss Army knife, Victorinox and Wenger, and the Swiss Army actually split its orders between them. Then Victorinox bought Wenger out in 2005 and quietly retired the Wenger knife brand in 2013. No new ones have been made since. And the moment a thing stops being produced, the survivors start creeping up. Now, most everyday Wenger models are still cheap, $25 to $65 for a clean discontinued one, and that's worth saying plainly, so nobody goes emptying a savings account over a red pocket knife. The ones worth setting aside are the retired specialty models and the genuine Swiss military issue knives, the soldier and standard issue pieces, still sealed or barely touched. Then there's the Wenger Giant, the genuinely absurd 87-tool brick that listed for around $1,400 brand new back when it was already one of the most expensive pocket knives on earth. Discontinued examples of that thing now ask $5,000, $7,000, and there's a documented one that reportedly changed hands for nearly $17,000. And there is something honestly funny about that. The exact red gadget people filed under cheap stocking stuffer is now the thing collectors elbow each other over, while the nearly identical Victorinox that's still in production sits right beside it, worth a fraction. Look at the shield on the handle. Wenger used a squared-off cross and shield, and Victorinox uses the rounded cross. If the one in your drawer says Wenger, you're holding a brand that's gone, and gone brands don't make any more. Number 5 hides its entire value in a row of tiny dots stamped under the blade. A vintage case. W.R. Case & Sons built an entire collector culture on the back of the humble slip joint, the classic stockman or trapper that sat in a million grandfathers' front pockets right next to the loose change. If you've inherited exactly one pocket knife in your life, there's a very good chance this is it. I've got my grandfather's, and when I finally sat down to work out what it actually was, I fell straight down a rabbit hole that Case dug on purpose. They did something almost no other knife company bothered with. They date-stamped everything on a code you can actually read. Starting in 1970, they put 10 dots under the tang stamp, then knocked off 1 dot every single year, so 9 dots is 1971, 5 dots is 1975, right on down the line until the dots run out. Go back before 1965 and the stamp reads Case Tested XX, and that tested era from the 20s and 30s is the material the serious collectors chase hardest. Handle material stacks on top of that. A common pattern in plastic stays a cheap knife, but that same pattern in genuine stag or nicely jigged bone, with the original box, is a completely different conversation, and a clean, older stag stockman can sit in the several $100 range on its own. 2 honest warnings, though. Most inherited case knives are common patterns worth real sentiment and not much money, and antique shops will happily price any old-looking pocket knife like it's buried treasure. And there's one that really stings. A story goes around the collector forums, a common one. A man pulls a single knife out of a box of his late uncle's things, recognizes it as his grandfather's, spends weeks learning to date it, and finally works out that at some point somebody sent it back for a warranty blade replacement. That new blade carries a newer stamp and softer modern steel, and it quietly guts the collector value. He kept it anyway, which is the right call. But it's a perfect lesson in why you read the knife first, while you still can. So read the stamp, count the dots, and then decide what you've got. Almost every family has a version of this next one floating around in a drawer somewhere. Number 4. A vintage Zippo lighter. During World War II, Zippo shipped its entire output to the military, and because brass was being funneled into the war effort, they built the cases out of steel and finished them in a black crackle paint. Those wartime black crackle Zippos, made from 1942 to 1945, are the ones that carry real weight now. A plain one runs $150 to $600, and if it's engraved with a genuine unit marking, you're into 4 figures. There's even a first-run black crackle from 1936 that reportedly sold at auction for something like $18,000, though that's the lightning strike example, not the one in your junk drawer. This is the category where people get fooled, so let me walk you through it. First, dating one. You'll hear people online swear that Zippo has stamped a date code on the bottom since 1933. That's flat wrong, and repeating it is the fastest way to tell a collector you don't know what you're doing. The bottom date code didn't start until 1955. Before that, you're reading the logo style, the patent markings, and even the number of barrels on the hinge to place it. A wartime one has the block letter logo and no code at all, and it's the finish and the hardware that date it, not a stamp. Second, and this is the big one, those Vietnam-era engraved Zippos, the ones covered in poems and unit art that everybody suddenly wants. The people who actually authenticate these will tell you the overwhelming majority of them for sale are fakes, engraved recently to fool collectors out of their money. It is an entire cottage industry, so a genuine, correctly stamped wartime Zippo with honest wear is real money. A shiny one you can't date, or a suspiciously perfect Vietnam engraving on a lighter that's otherwise too clean, is usually a trap. And whatever you do, do not polish it. I've watched people take a wire wheel to a wartime crackle finish to make it look sharp, and every pass is money coming off. The paint and the patina are the value. Let me stop for 1 second, because the last 3 are where a junk drawer turns into a down payment. If you're getting something out of this, subscribing is the smart move here. This whole channel is one long argument that knowing your gear is worth real money, and I make that case every week. Alright, the big ones. This is where the numbers stop being cute. Number 3. Vintage Seiko dive watches. Back in the late 60s and 70s, Seiko was making rugged automatic divers that sold for pocket money. The kind of watch a soldier or a working guy bought specifically to beat on. The most famous is the one collectors call the Willard, the cushion-cased diver Martin Sheen wore in Apocalypse Now. When it came out, it was a cheap tool watch. Today, a good original Willard runs somewhere between $1,300 and $3,700, and its more common younger brother, the one everybody nicknames the Turtle, has climbed close to 40% in just 5 years. I wear a vintage Seiko diver myself, and the only reason I could afford it is that I bought it before most people were paying attention. A lot of these turn up beaten and corroded, and there's a reason that matters. The locking crown on the old Willard had a habit of failing, so seawater got in and chewed up dials and hands, which is exactly why a clean, all-original one is worth what it's worth. Honest survivors are genuinely uncommon. The catch is a serious one, though. Seiko made these by the truckload, so they are not rare, and the market is absolutely flooded with what collectors call Frankens, watches cobbled together from mismatched parts, plus straight-up redialed junk. The value lives entirely in originality, so here it isn't a stamp you're reading, it's honesty. An unpolished example with its original dial, hands, and bezel is worth several times one that's been Frankensteined together or had its dial repainted to look fresh. The genuinely scarce one, if you want to know, is an even earlier Seiko diver that collectors treat as a small grail in its own right, and an untouched one of those is a different league entirely. But the lesson holds across all of them. If somebody in your family had a scratched-up old Seiko diver they wore in the service, that scratched-up, all-original condition is exactly what a collector is paying for. Get the movement serviced so it runs if you like. That part's fine. But swapping in nicer-looking parts or repainting the dial is how you flush the money straight down the drain. Number 2 proves that scarcity all by itself is a kind of money. Randall made knives. Randall builds handmade fixed blades down in Orlando, and they build them slowly and flatly refuse to jack up their prices, which sounds generous right up until you see what it creates. The current wait to order a new one straight from them is around 7 years. 7. So the secondhand market runs white hot, because a Randall you can actually hold today beats a promise of one in the 2030s. A knife that cost about $35 in 1966 resells for around $550 now, and the rarer vintage models climb into the thousands, some of them past $6,000. I know a collector who put his name on that list, waited the better part of a decade, and talks about the day the box finally showed up like it was a kid's birthday morning. And this is the part that breaks people's brains a little. Randall could clear that backlog tomorrow by tripling their prices, and they simply won't do it. They keep the price honest and the line long on purpose, so the company itself is basically handing the profit to the second-hand market, which is why holding one that already exists is the whole game. With a Randall, it comes down to the sheath and the paperwork. The value is tied hard to the original, period-correct sheath and any papers that came with it, and a Randall that's lost its original sheath brings dramatically less, sometimes a fraction of the same knife with its correct rig. That also means fakes and resheathed knives are a real thing in this corner, so the sheath maker's stampings and the paperwork are what tell you it's honest. So if there's a plain-looking handmade fixed blade in the family, with a worn leather sheath and an old envelope of paperwork tucked alongside it, do not separate them, and do not write it off as just an old hunting knife. Read the stamp on the blade first. And number 1. The piece people give away the most without ever knowing what it was, and the reason I started this whole thing talking about a sock drawer. An inherited steel Rolex, not a gold dress Rolex on a jeweler's velvet cushion. I mean the beat-up steel tool watch, the Submariner or the Explorer that some father or grandfather bought decades ago for a few $100s, wore every single day for 30 years, and left in a drawer when he passed. To an heir who isn't a watch person, it looks like a scratched-up old watch that needs a service nobody wants to pay for. To the market, a vintage no-date steel Submariner from the 60s or 70s is a $15,000 to $40,000 object, and the rarest dial variants go far, far higher than that. The cruelest part of this whole list is what comes next, and you have to understand it before you so much as touch one. The instinct, when you inherit a scratched-up old watch, is to make it nice again. Send it off, get the case polished, have the faded dial swapped for a fresh one. Every one of those moves torches the value. An unpolished case wearing its original honestly aged dial can be worth 2 or 3 times a restored one, and a replacement service dial by itself can cut the price by 1/3 to 1/2. Those scratches are proof of what it is, and that faded dial is a huge part of what the money is actually paying for. The urge to tidy it up is the single most expensive mistake an heir can make, running a close second only to selling it to the first pawn shop that waves a few $100 at them. And the way heirs actually lose this one is rarely dramatic. Nobody gets robbed. What happens is somebody walks a grandfather's watch into a pawn shop or a We Buy Gold place, hears a few $100, figures an old scratched watch that doesn't even keep great time isn't worth the hassle, and takes it. The buyer knew. That's the whole transaction. So the move, if one of these lands in your lap, is boringly simple. Do not sell it to the first counter that makes an offer. Get it looked at by an auction house or an independent appraiser who isn't the one trying to buy it, and understand that the fakes in this world are very, very good, so identification cuts both ways. Hang on to the box and the papers if they exist, because those add real money too. So if there is an old steel sports Rolex anywhere in your family, leave it exactly as it is, keep any box and papers with it, and get it identified by somebody who has no stake in buying it from you. That scratched up watch in the sock drawer really can be worth more than the car in the driveway. Every one of these 8 looks like clutter, and not one of them looks like money. That's the trap, and it's also the opening. An old multi-tool, a belt knife, a lighter, a scratched watch. The thing that separates a fortune from a flea market pile is usually one small mark hardly anybody bothers to read. The stamp, the date code, the reference on a caseback, an original sheath and box. Learn to read those, and you start looking at a junk drawer the way a dealer looks at it, which is the whole skill, and now it's yours. So build one habit, starting today. Before anything you own leaves the house, whether you're selling it, tossing it, or handing it down, turn it over and actually read it before it goes anywhere. Because a thing is only junk until somebody knows what it is. And honestly, on a lot of these, the smart money answer and the right answer aren't the same thing. Your grandfather's case, your father's Seiko, the watch off a wrist you can still picture, those are worth more sitting in your drawer than in anybody else's pocket. But here's what I actually want down in the comments. Tell me about the one that almost got away. The thing you nearly sold, nearly tossed, nearly handed over for pocket change, until something made you look twice. I want to hear about the one you caught just in time.